Until recently, creating a pivot table was the easiest way for summarizing data. With the introduction of the GROUPBY function, we can now create these summary reports and have them update automatically without the need of refreshing manually. I am Nabil Murad. In this tutorial, I explain how to use the GROUPBY function with lists, or with tables, or with named ranges. I then go beyond the basics to make it interactive by using drop lists. So let's dive in. In this worksheet, I have a list which shows a region, a manager, a client, and an amount. I created a pivot table out of this list that shows the sum of the amount for each region. If the input values change, the pivot table doesn't update automatically, and I will have to take care of refreshing manually. On another worksheet, I have the same list, and I want to explore the GROUPBY function, which has 7 arguments. Only 3 arguments are mandatory arguments, and the 4 other arguments are optional arguments. I will be creating a report that looks like the one created by a pivot table, so I start by typing equal GROUPBY. I want to select the region, then I select the first value, Shift Control down arrow Control backspace, and then I type a comma. The second argument for the values, what do you want? I want the amount. I select the top cell, Shift Control down arrow Control backspace, and then comma. I want to select a sum function. We are not limited to the sum function, but just to match the pivot table, I'll be using sum. I close the bracket. As simple as that, I was able to create the report. If I change one of the input values, let's say I'm selecting the first value for the East region and I'll make it 2000. When I hit enter, my function updates automatically, and that's a great advantage over a pivot table. When I have tables instead of lists, creating a GROUPBY function makes selection easier. So in the next worksheet, I have the same data but in a table, and I name the table data. And I'll be creating my GROUPBY function. I type equal GROUPBY. I hit the tab key. For the first argument row fields, I want the region. Then I simply hover over the region. When I see the black down pointing arrow, I click and I would have selected the region. I type a comma. And for the value field, I want the amount. I hover over the amount. When I see the black down pointing arrow, I select the amount. I type a comma. And let's use a sum function for now. I close the bracket, and when I hit enter, I get the same exact result. I'm going to delete this GROUPBY function, and I want to recreate it and talk about the optional arguments. My selection for the fields in a table will be a little different. I hit the delete key and I start over again. Equal GROUPBY, and then I hit the tab key. I want the region. Then I hover over region, I click once and then I click a second time to include the header. I type a comma. I hover over the amount column, I click once and then I click a second time. Note that the GROUPBY function will return an error if the two fields, the row field and the value field, are not of equal size. I then type a comma, and let's say I want a sum function. I close the bracket and then I hit enter. I'm getting the same result. Now let's put it in the edit mode F2, delete the closing bracket, type a comma, and now I start talking about the next argument, which is the field header. The default is not to have headers, but if you want to include headers, then I select option number 3, I type 3, and then I close the bracket, I hit enter. It's extracting the region as a header. But look at the value field, it doesn't have a header. We can deal with that with a little modification to the GROUPBY function. But let's continue exploring the other options. I hit F2 and then I delete the closing bracket, I type a comma, and the next argument, it's related to the totals. The default is number 1, having a grand total at the bottom, but you can also move the grand total to the top. You can add a subtotal. That doesn't work when you have one single field. You need to have in the rows area more than one single field. I'm going to keep the default grand total, which is 1, and then I type a comma. The next argument is for sorting. How would you like to sort? I would like to sort in an ascending order, that's the default, but you can change by selecting -1, that will be a descending order. When I hit enter, I have the region sorted Z to A. If I change and I make it 2, I'll be sorting by the amount. Let's hit F2 and I select 2 instead of 1. That's the amount column. When I hit enter, I'm sorting in an ascending order based upon the amount. To talk about the subtotal, I have to put my function in the edit mode F2, and I'll be selecting the first argument, which is the row fields. And instead of just having the region, I click in the region once, I click a second time, and I drag to the right to select the manager. When I hit enter, I get the region and manager, and now I can add a subtotal. I put my function in the edit mode F2, and for the total depth argument, I delete this one, and I can select an option that shows the subtotal, let's say number 2, that will add the subtotal at the bottom of the group. Then I have the east and then east subtotal, the north and the north subtotal, and so on. If I change the total depth argument to -2, the subtotal will be moved to the top. I hit F2, and instead of 2, I can type -2. When I hit enter, then the subtotal moves to the top. With a table, creating a group by function that uses multiple fields is even easier. So in this worksheet, I type equal group by, and then I hit tab, and then I click once to select the region, I click a second time to select the header, and then I drag to the right to select the manager column, and then I type a comma, and let's say I want 2 fields for the values, then I click once, and then I click a second time, I drag to the right to select the cost of goods sold and sales, I type a comma, and then I want a sum function, I close the bracket and then hit enter, and here is my group by function. Let's deal with the optional arguments. I added the numbers in separate cells. I put my function in the edit mode, I delete the closing bracket, I type a comma, and for the field header, I'll be selecting cell M4, I type a comma, and for the total depths, I select the total depths from cell N4, and then I type a comma. For the sort order, I'll be selecting cell O4, I close the bracket, and then I hit enter. Now I have some headers being added, region, manager, cost of goods sold and sales. If I don't want headers, I can explore the different options. What if I select 0? Then the headers are gone. What if I select 1? I don't see headers, but the thing is, option number 1, I don't want to show the header. And then what if I select 2? Option number 2 puts a temporary name for the field header, row field 1, row field 2, value 1, value 2, but the best option is to select number 3 so long as we are selecting the headers from the table. What about the total depth? The total depth is about having totals and subtotals and the position of the grand total and the subtotal. So the different options that we have, 0 is to hide the total, option 1, that's the default, I have a total here at the bottom. I can also add a subtotal at the bottom of each group by selecting option number 2, here is the subtotal, and I can move the grand total to the top. -1 means only grand total, and I have it at the top of the group, and then -2 means a grand total and a subtotal at the top of the group. I will go with option 1 or 2, that's much better. I will select option 1, here is the total at the bottom of my report. For the sort order, 1 means I'm sorting the region in an ascending order. If I click on the down arrow and I select -1, I'm reversing the sort, and if I select 2, is sorting in an ascending order for the manager within each region. And option number 3, I'm sorting in an ascending order for the cost of goods sold for each one of the regions. We can make our group by function a lot more dynamic and interactive if we use the functionality of named ranges. Then in the next worksheet, I created some named ranges. If I click on the down arrow and I select amount, I have the entire column named amount. If I click on the down arrow and I select client, I have the entire column named client. Note that the name includes the header as well. and I'll be creating my group by function. I have some field names available in row number 4. I'll be referring to the named range manager and the named range amount in my group by function. So I type equal group by, and then I hit tab, and because I'll be referring to a named range, I use the indirect function. Then I type indirect, and then I hit tab. I want the indirect of cell G4. I close the bracket. For the indirect function, I type a comma, and I want the named range amount for the values. Then I type indirect, and then I hit tab. I click on the cell having amount cell H4. I type a comma, and now I want a sum function. I close the bracket, and when I hit enter, I get my report. This report is dynamic. So if I change from manager and I click on region, then automatically the report updates. If I click on client, the report updates as well. But it looks like we don't have headers, so I want to edit my group by function. I hit F2, and I'll be using the optional arguments. The optional arguments are also available in row number 4. I'll be referring to them. I put my function in the edit mode F2, and then I delete the closing bracket. I type a comma. I select K4 for the field header. I type a comma. I select cell L4 for the total depth, comma, and I click on cell M4 for the sort option. I close the bracket, and now let's play with the different options. I want to bring the header, then from the field headers drop list, I select number 3 and it brings the header. That's wonderful. What about the total depth? If I want to move the grand total from the bottom to the top, I don't need a subtotal because I have a single field for the row field argument, and for the sort option, should you wish to change to ascending or descending or even sort by the amount column, let's say I select the amount column, and now I'm sorting by the amount in an ascending order. The last optional argument is a filter, so I can use the filter for each region. I hit F2 and I delete the closing bracket, I type a comma, and for the filter I use an indirect function for the region. That's the advantage of using named ranges. I select cell O4 and I say if it's not equal to the south region. I close the bracket and hit enter, and now I have the sum of sales for each client in all regions excluding the south region. I have a drop list in cell P4. What if I change my selection and I want to exclude the east region? When I select the east region, all the numbers update. What if we want to use multiple calculations instead of just using a single calculation? Then in this case, I have to wrap them in an hstack function. So let's see an example. In the tables worksheet, I created this report where I have the sum of the amount, but I also want the average for the amount. Then I put my function in the edit mode, and for the argument where I have the function, I'm going to create an hstack function, hstack. I open bracket, I click after the sum, I type a comma and I type average. I close the bracket for the hstack function, I hit enter. Now I have the sum and average for the region and manager. If you don't want to see a grand total or a subtotal at the top, then we need to edit an argument. I hit F2. And I'll be editing this -2 argument. I'll be typing 1 to get only the grand total at the bottom of the report. When I hit enter, here is my beautiful report. In this example, I have a table which shows a category, a product, the cost, and sales. In each category, I have multiple products. I want to create a report that lists the products in each category. And it counts at the same time how many products do we have in each category. The group by function can help me do that. So I type equal group by, and then I hit tab. For the row field area, I'll be selecting the category, and then I type a comma. For the value field, I'll be selecting the product, and then I type a comma. I want two functions. I want to count how many products I have in each category, and at the same time, I want all the products in each category separated by comma. Then I use an hstack function, and I type a count A function. I type a comma, and then I type an array to text function, array to text. Now I close the bracket for the hstack function, I close the bracket for the GROUPBY function, and when I hit enter, here is my report. Then I have the different categories, I have the count of products in each category, and I get for each category the products belonging to that category. If you found value in this tutorial, give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to my channel to be notified when new tutorials are released. The best is yet to come. Thanks for watching and see you next time.